the ambassador's daughter. The air was a sweltering embrace, thick with the perfume of fertile soil and exotic blooms. Anya Petrova swiped at the moisture gathering on her forehead, smearing a streak of rust-colored earth across her skin. A peal of childish laughter erupted as a small boy pointed a mud-caked finger at her impromptu war paint. "Blending in," she quipped, her words tinged with the lilt of the local tongue. Another giggle, and he was darting away to join the other children carefully setting fragile saplings into the rejuvenated earth along the river's edge. Watching them, Anya felt that familiar surge of purpose bloom in her chest. This project, a fragile green shoot nurtured by her father's embassy and tended by local hands, was a stand against the devastation wrought by illegal logging. More than just trees, they cultivated resilience. "Anya-san?" A resonant voice called Kaito, the project foreman, approached, his brow creased with worry. "The medicine. The delivery is, once more, delayed. The truck has not arrived." Anya expelled a weary breath 3 times in as many weeks. The promised relief, antimalarials and antibiotics, was paramount, with the looming monsoon season a constant threat. "Did you reach the driver, Kaito?" "Hi, Anya-san." He spoke of men. Soldiers on the road. They detained him, questioning him at length that he sounded frightened. A cold prickle traced Anya's spine, a warning she'd come to heed, the premonition of something deeply amiss. The embassy briefings had mentioned growing unrest, the shadow of General Varga's militia stretching across the region, downplayed, of course, with reassurances of a situation under control. But Anya had witnessed the fear lurking in the eyes of the villagers, heard the murmurs carried on the wind. "Okay, Kaito, let's not jump to conclusions. Perhaps a simple mechanical issue. Recontact the depot. See if they have any updates." She summoned a smile, projecting a confidence she didn't possess. "Meanwhile, we still have existing reserves. We focus on what we can accomplish." As Kaito receded, Anya's gaze swept the verdant jungle that embraced them, a deceptive beauty. A tapestry concealing a world of shadow. Many miles away, buried deep within that emerald maze, General Varga reigned. His headquarters, a fortress hewn from the earth and bolstered by pilfered military hardware, stood as a stark monument to his dominion. The air throbbed with the acrid tang of diesel and sweat, punctuated by the brutal staccato of gunfire. He stood upon a crude dais, his gaze sweeping across the courtyard where a clutch of prisoners knelt, their hands bound, dissidents, spies, traitors in his warped perception. Those who dared question, dared resist his grand design. Varga raised a hand, silencing the yard. His gaze, devoid of warmth, lingered on each prisoner. "You have betrayed me," he bellowed, his voice a guttural roar that reverberated through the compound. "You have betrayed our people, chosen the path of the enemy." One prisoner, a young woman whose eyes blazed with defiance, spat at him. Rage contorted Varga's features. He nodded to his lieutenant, a hulking figure whose face bore the brutal artwork of a deep scar. The lieutenant advanced, drawing his machete. At a single, swift stroke extinguished the woman's spark. A ripple of fear pulsed through the kneeling prisoners. Varga observed, impassive. "This," he declared, "is the fate that awaits those who defy me, those who impede our destiny." He gestured, and the lieutenant, along with several soldiers, began the grim work of executing the remaining prisoners. One by one, the air became thick with desperate cries and the sickening thud of steel meeting bone. Varga turned away, a faint nausea stirring in his gut. That he gained no pleasure from this, not truly, but it was vital. Fear was currency, and control demanded obedience. His gaze settled upon a map unfurled on a nearby table. His finger traced the serpentine course of the river, halting at a spot marked with a scarlet circle, the reforestation project. The ambassador's daughter. He had been observing her, tracking her movements, accumulating intelligence. She was a pawn, a valuable instrument. Her father's influence held possibilities, and beyond that, the prospect of plucking something precious from the elite, of demonstrating their vulnerability, appealed to him. A slow, predatory smile stretched across Varga's lips. The game was about to commence. Back at the reforestation project, a creeping unease settled over Anya. The humid air felt heavier. The jungle seemed to constrict, watching. She noted the growing reticence of the local workers, their eyes darting nervously towards the dense foliage. She approached Kaido, who was huddled with a group of men, their voices lowered to a frantic murmur. As she drew near, they fell silent, apprehension etched on their faces. "Kaido, what is it?" Anya asked, barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then spoke with evident reluctance. "Anya-san, there are rumors circulating. Varga's men. They are said to be nearby, seeking new recruits, taking what they desire." Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the reckoning, the moment anticipated with dread. The threat had materialized, closing in like a tightening noose. She drew a deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. "We have to leave," she stated, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her throat. "We gather our equipment and return to the village now." As the workers scrambled to collect their belongings, Anya cast one last glance at the darkening jungle. The setting sun painted long, menacing shadows. Time was running out. The jungle, once a sanctuary, had become a trap, and they were caught in its jaws. Ambush. The sun, a malevolent eye in the sky, pressed down, turning the air into a cloying blanket. Anya dabbed at the perspiration stinging her temples, a trivial discomfort compared to the knot of foreboding twisting in her gut. Their small convoy, two dented land cruisers flanking a truck groaning under the weight of saplings and supplies, lumbered down the eroded jungle trail. The monotonous thrum of the engines competed with the vibrant chorus of unseen insects and the raucous cries of parrots hidden deep within the emerald canopy. "Ben, ETA?" Anya's voice, thin and staticky, crackled from the radio. "Hour, give or take, depending on the terrain." Ben's voice responded from the lead vehicle. He served as the project's logistics anchor. "Roads deteriorating fast. Those improvements Varga promised? Still just hot air, I reckon." Anya exhaled sharply. Empty promises were Varga's currency. She spared a glance at Omar, her taciturn security chief, his face a mask of concentration. His grip tightened on his rifle, his eyes ceaselessly dissecting the claustrophobic wall of foliage. A veteran soldier, Omar possessed a sixth sense for danger, and right now, his unease radiated like a palpable wave. Then, without warning, the world detonated. A thunderous blast ripped through the humid air as a rocket-propelled grenade found its mark. On the truck behind them, twisted metal screamed, and the air choked with smoke, pulverized earth, and the sharp bite of cordite. Before Anya could even register the shock, a storm of gunfire erupted from the dense underbrush flanking the track. "Ambush!" Omar roared, forcibly pushing Anya down. He unleashed a torrent of return fire, automatic rounds tearing gashes in the vegetation. Anya fumbled for her own sidearm, a weapon she rarely handled. This was it. Varga wasn't just stalling, he'd escalated into outright war. The land cruiser screeched to a halt. Ben's frantic shout over the radio was abruptly silenced by a burst of static. Anya knew, with sickening certainty, that he was dead. Omar laid down continuous suppressive fire, allowing Anya a precious moment to take stock. Figures in tattered uniforms, faces concealed by bandanas, poured from the jungle, brandishing AK-47s. The air vibrated with the whine of ricochets and the staccato hammering of gunfire. "We need to move," Anya yelled, her voice swallowed by the cacophony. Omar shook his head grimly. "Nowhere to run. We're pinned." He gestured toward the roadside. "Reach the ditch, our only chance." Anya kicked the door open and tumbled out, bullets snapping past her head, spitting dirt. She threw herself into the shallow ditch, the impact sending a jolt through her. Omar continued his unwavering cover fire, but she knew their odds were dismal. They were overwhelmingly outnumbered, outgunned, and completely vulnerable. She crawled through the muddy trench, desperately seeking a clearer view. She spotted 2 members of her team lying still near the mangled remains of the truck. Others returned. Fire, their efforts amounting to little more than defiance against the brutal assault. Anya caught sight of one of Varga's men advancing toward her. His face twisted in a predatory grin, he raised his rifle with trembling hands. She aimed her handgun and squeezed the trigger. The man stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but pressed onward. Suddenly, Omar appeared at her side, pushing her deeper into the trench. He expended the last of his ammunition at the advancing attackers, buying her fleeting seconds. Then, with a pained grunt, he collapsed beside her, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. "Go!" he rasped, his voice fading. "Get out. Survive." Anya stared at him, paralyzed by grief and disbelief. She couldn't abandon him, but she knew his assessment was correct. Staying meant certain annihilation for them both. She inched further along the ditch, the din of battle receding behind her. Reaching the edge of the jungle, she hesitated, casting a final glance back at the carnage. Then, summoning every ounce of resolve, she plunged into the suffocating green depths. She blundered through the undergrowth, battling clinging vines and thorny thickets, the sounds of pursuit diminishing in the distance. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced her legs to carry her forward. She had to escape. She had to alert the embassy to what had occurred. But as she surmounted a slight rise, she froze. More of Varga's soldiers, barring her path. They had anticipated her likely escape. There was no place left to run, no place to hide. Rough hands seized her, their grip bruising and unyielding. She struggled in vain. They bound her wrists behind her back and dragged her back towards the road. Emerging from the jungle, she surveyed the bleak landscape of the ambush. The land cruisers resembled sieves, the truck a smoking pyre. Corpses were strewn across the roadway. The remaining survivors were being herded together, their faces reflecting abject terror. Varga stood near one of the bullet-riddled vehicles, his expression cold and calculating as he took in the devastation. He spotted Anya, and a slow, predatory smile stretched across his lips. He raised a hand, and her captors propelled her toward him. "Welcome, Anya Petrova," Varga purred, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I trust your journey proved memorable." Whispers of war. The telex in Ambassador Davies' office clattered out its message with the manic energy of a caged animal. He scanned the message, the news draining the color from his face under the sterile glow of the overhead light. He reread it, each phrase a blow to his senses. Petrova.ambush, Varga.captured. The air, usually redolent of lemon polish and quiet influence, turned stagnant, pressing down on him. With a shaky hand, he snatched the secure phone. "Get me the president." Code red. Now. Beneath the West Wing, the windowless White House Situation Room thrummed with a palpable tension. The president, typically a beacon of serene command, stalked back and forth around the massive table. Faces were etched with worry. The Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, the National Security Advisor, and select senior staff. The atmosphere reeked of stale coffee and unspoken dread. "All right, let's get this straight," the president stated, his voice clipped. "Anya Petrova, our UN ambassador's daughter, has been seized by Varga's forces. This is a naked act of war." "Mr. President," the Secretary of State began, her tone carefully modulated. "We've contacted Varga through intermediaries. He insists Ms. Petrova is being protected, that the area is too volatile." A snort echoed from the Secretary of Defense. "Protection? His thugs decimated a UN convoy. This is flagrant aggression. A bid for power. Varga's been spoiling for this. He aims to shatter regional stability, and he's using Petrova as a bargaining chip." "What avenues are open to us?" the president inquired, ceasing his restless movement to fix his gaze on the National Security Advisor. "Firstly, Mr. President, diplomatic channels. We can escalate sanctions, galvanize international disapproval. However, Varga is deeply embedded. He wields the resources, the manpower, and, frankly, The brutality to endure any diplomatic storm we conjure. The alternative? The president's voice was grave, heavy with foreboding. Direct action, sought out a precise strike to extract Ms. Petrova and cripple Varga's operation. It's a high-risk endeavor. Varga has heavily fortified his compound. Intel indicates formidable anti-aircraft capabilities and a substantial force of seasoned mercenaries. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. The Secretary of State broke it, clearing her throat. Mr. President, a military incursion constitutes a declaration of war. The consequences would be devastating. We risk widening the conflict, ensnaring other regional players. And the alternative, Madam Secretary? The Secretary of Defense retorted, his tone sharp as a blade. Allow Varga to operate with impunity? Demonstrate a lack of resolve to safeguard our own. We cannot parley with terrorists, and Varga is simply a glorified one. The debate intensified, each stance a well-defended bastion, each rebuttal a siege weapon. The president listened, his face a mask of concern, the weight of the decision crushing him. Anya Petrova was more than just the offspring of a diplomat. She was a representation, a symbol of American determination, of global collaboration, of the fragile hope for tranquility in a world consumed by chaos. Far from Varga's fortress, in a humble, dust-choked village, a very different discussion unfolded. Anya Petrova, her face smeared with dirt, clad in borrowed, threadbare garments, huddled with a group of villagers. The reforestation endeavor she had been overseeing lay in ruins, the saplings uprooted, the promise they embodied crushed under the heel of Varga's brutal regime. They've taken everything? A wizened woman grieved, her voice like rustling leaves. Our sustenance, our medicines, our very hope. Anya, despite her perilous predicament, felt a surge of fierce defiance. We will rebuild, she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. We will not allow Varga to break us. Yet even as the words left her lips, they rang hollow. Varga had revealed his hand. The whispers of conflict had grown into a deafening roar, and she stood directly in the path, surveying the faces of the villagers, their eyes filled with terror and uncertainty. A chilling recognition dawned on her. She was no longer merely a diplomat's daughter. She had become a pawn in an infinitely complex game, and she had no idea how to play it. The legend returns. The axe blade flashed in the crisp morning air, a silver arc biting deep into the seasoned oak. Sweat plastered Chuck Norris's salt and pepper hair to his forehead. Each swing precise, powerful, born from decades of honed muscle memory. The rhythmic thud echoed through the redwood forest, a counterpoint to the chirping of unseen birds. His cabin, a testament to self-sufficiency, stood nestled amongst the ancient trees, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Life here was simple, deliberate, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. He split the last log, the scent of freshly cleaved wood filling his lungs, dropping the axe. He moved with a silent grace that belied his age towards a makeshift dojo carved into the earth near the cabin. Sun-drenched dust motes danced in the air as he began his kata. Each movement a story etched in his sinews. A block became a shield against betrayal, a strike a hammer blow against injustice. He was a living weapon, sheathed but never truly at rest. The crunch of gravel under tires broke the stillness. Chuck stopped, every sense on high alert. Visitors were rare, unwelcome disruptions to his chosen solitude. He watched, a shadow detaching itself from the cabin's eaves. As a black SUV lumbered up the narrow, winding track, the vehicle stopped a respectful distance away. A figure emerged, tall and imposing in a tailored suit, a stark contrast to the surrounding wilderness. General Wallace. Chuck remained motionless, an unreadable expression on his face. Wallace approached, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue. Norris? Wallace greeted, his voice gravelly. Chuck nodded, offering no greeting in return. He knew Wallace wouldn't have come unless it was important. The general wasn't a man to waste time. We have a situation, Wallace began, his gaze fixed on the forest floor. Anya Petrova? You know the name? Chuck's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew the name, daughter of the UN ambassador, a political pawn. Varga? Wallace continued, stating the name with a venomous hiss. He's taken her, holding her in that godforsaken jungle camp of his. Chuck remained silent, absorbing the information. Varga. The name conjured images of brutality, a man who carved his empire from the bones of the innocent. The president is considering options, Wallace said, his voice low. Diplomacy, military intervention, but neither is a clean solution. Too much risk. He looked up, his eyes meeting Chuck's. We need someone discreet, someone who can get in, get her out without igniting a full-scale war. Chuck finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. There are teams for that, General. Special Forces, SEALs. They're too conspicuous, Wallace countered. Varga anticipates them. He's prepared. We need someone unexpected. Someone who operates outside the conventional playbook. Someone like you. Chuck turned away, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The request was a violation of his self-imposed exile. He'd seen enough bloodshed, enough senseless loss. He'd buried too many ghosts. I'm done, Wallace, he said, his voice flat. I left that life behind. Wallace didn't flinch. I know what you've been through, Norris. But this isn't about you, it's about Anya Petrova, an innocent caught in the crossfire. He paused, then added, and the villagers. Varga is escalating his operations. More raids, more killings. This isn't just about one girl anymore. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Chuck closed his eyes, the faces of the fallen flashing through his mind. He'd tried to escape the past, to build a life of peace. But some debts couldn't be outrun. Some evils couldn't be ignored. He turned back to Wallace, his expression hardening. What do you know about Varga's security? A flicker of relief crossed Wallace's face. Heavy fortifications, perimeter guards, watchtowers, reinforced bunkers. He's got a small army of mercenaries, well-trained and heavily armed. Chuck nodded slowly. Old-school tactics, then. Wallace raised an eyebrow. You'll go in alone? Alone is how I work best. We can provide intel, equipment. I'll take a map. And a promise. A promise. Get the villagers out. Offer them protection that they're caught in the middle of this, that I won't move until they are safe. Wallace hesitated, then nodded. Consider it done. Chuck turned and walked towards his cabin. He stopped at the doorway, glancing back at Wallace. One more thing. What's that? Tell the president. Tell him the legend has returned. Mission briefing. The lamplight cast long shadows across the rough-hewn table as Chuck Norris, his face a landscape of weathered determination, absorbed the intelligence reports. General Varga's image stared back. A man carved from granite, eyes burning with ruthless ambition. The accompanying dossier detailed Varga's rise from a petty warlord to a regional power. His methods as brutal as they were effective: massacres, forced conscription, scorched earth tactics. The words painted a grim picture. He flipped to the schematics of Varga's compound, nestled deep within the emerald labyrinth of the jungle. It was more than just a base. It was a fortress. 3 concentric rings of barbed wire, minefields, and strategically placed guard towers bristled with heavy machine guns. Patrols, both on foot and in armored vehicles, maintained constant vigilance. Satellite imagery revealed thermal sensors and motion detectors blanketing the perimeter. Inside, the central structure, a reinforced concrete bunker, presumably, held Anya Petrova. Wallace cleared his throat, the sound barely audible above the crackling fire in the hearth. Chuck, as you can see, this isn't a simple snatch and grab. Varga has essentially built himself a kingdom. Diplomatically, we're at a standstill. Any overt military action would destabilize the entire region, potentially triggering a wider conflict. Chuck nodded, his gaze unwavering. He traced a finger across the map. noting the natural choke points and the dense vegetation surrounding the compound. He's relying on conventional defenses. Precisely, Wallace confirmed. Which is why we need you. Your unconventional approach, we've identified a potential weakness. A drainage tunnel that runs beneath the outer perimeter. It's used to channel rainwater away from the compound during the monsoon season. It's narrow, claustrophobic, and likely guarded, but it's the only viable infiltration route we've found. Guarded how? Chuck asked, his voice a low rumble. Sporadically. Varga's men are disciplined, but they're also human. Complacency sets in. We've observed patrol patterns. There are blind spots, times when the tunnel entrance is unguarded for short periods. A younger officer, a Lieutenant Davies, stepped forward, his face etched with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Sir, with all due respect, even if you manage to get inside, the compound is crawling with soldiers. We estimate at least 200, all heavily armed. 200, Chuck echoed, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. That's a Tuesday. Wallace ignored the lieutenant's incredulous stare. Anya is likely being held in the central bunker. We don't have precise details on its internal layout, but we believe Varga keeps a personal guard with him at all times. Chuck leaned back, his mind already dissecting the information, formulating possibilities. He needed a distraction, something to draw Varga's attention away from Anya, and he needed an exit strategy. Getting in was only half the battle. Getting out, with Anya in tow, would be the real challenge. He stood, the movement fluid and effortless despite his age. I'll need detailed topographical maps of the surrounding terrain. I want to know every ravine, every stream, every game trail. We have them, Wallace replied, producing a rolled-up map. Also, a comms package. Encrypted channel, direct line to me. Chuck took the map, unrolling it on the table. He studied the intricate lines and contours, his eyes scanning the landscape like a hawk searching for prey. This jungle, he said, more to himself than to the others. It can be an ally or an enemy. It depends on how you use it. He pointed to a dense patch of forest bordering the compound's western perimeter. That's where I'll stage my approach. It offers cover, concealment, and it's far enough from the main gate to avoid drawing immediate attention. Understood, Wallace said. We'll provide aerial reconnaissance to monitor Varga's movements. But once you're inside, you're on your own. Chuck, we can't risk compromising the mission with external support. Chuck nodded, his gaze hardening. He looked from Wallace to Lieutenant Davies, his expression unreadable. Then let's get to work. The air in the room seemed to crackle with a renewed energy, the weight of the mission settling squarely on Chuck Norris's shoulders. He was walking back into the fire, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever, preparing for war. The jungle air hung thick and heavy, a humid blanket clinging to Chuck's skin as he moved with a surprising fluidity. He wasn't in a high-tech armory, surrounded by gadgets and gizmos. He was in a clearing, a circle of raw earth carved out amidst the emerald chaos, and his weapons were as old as the hills, the gnarled bow staff, worn smooth with age and countless hours of practice, was the first to sing in his hands. He whirled it, a blur of motion deflecting imagined blows, each strike precise, each block a testament to decades of dedication. The air cracked with the force of his movements, and no fancy optics, no laser sights. Just wood, muscle, and instinct. He moved on to a pair of sai, their polished steel glinting in the dappled sunlight. The short, trident-like blades became extensions of his arms, deflecting, parrying, and feinting in a silent dance of death. He spun, a whirlwind of controlled aggression, the sai whistling a deadly tune. He visualized Varga's men, their faces contorted with malice, their weapons raised. He met their imagined attacks with unwavering focus. Then came the silence. Chuck knelt, settling into a meditative pose, the rough earth grounding him. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the jungle wash over him, the incessant drone of insects, the distant chatter of monkeys, the the rustling of leaves in the unseen breeze, that he wasn't trying to empty his mind. He was filling it. Filling it with purpose, with resolve, with the image of Anya Petrova, her face a silent plea that he pictured her strength, the determination that shone through in the briefing files, the qualities that made her a target for Varga. He would not fail her. The weight of responsibility settled on him, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. He breathed deeply, drawing the energy of the jungle into his core, channeling it into a laser-like focus. He cleared away any lingering doubts, any flicker of hesitation. Only the mission remained. He rose, the transition seamless, his eyes clear and sharp. The spiritual preparation was complete. Now for the practical. His gear wasn't about flashy technology. It was about reliability, about self-sufficiency. A worn leather belt, laden with pouches, held the essentials. A compass, a signal mirror, a small first-aid kit, and a whetstone for keeping his blades razor-sharp. He carefully examined each item, ensuring its functionality, its readiness. A canteen, filled with purified water, was secured tightly to his belt. A durable poncho, capable of repelling both rain and prying eyes, was folded and stowed in his pack. He checked his trusty K-bar fighting knife, running his thumb along its honed edge. No GPS, no satellite phone. He would rely on his instincts, his training, and his connection to the land. He was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the wind, and Varga wouldn't see him coming. He laid out the set of lockpicks he had filed and prepared himself, specifically tailored for the types of locks commonly used in Varga's era. Equipment. A small detail, but details mattered. Lives depended on them. He selected a set of dark, lightweight clothing, chosen for its breathability and camouflage properties. He tested the soles of his jungle boots, ensuring they provided adequate grip on the treacherous terrain. He needed to move silently, swiftly, and with unwavering confidence. Finally, he took out a photograph. A picture of his wife, Gina. He held it in his calloused hand, tracing the lines of her face with his finger. A silent promise passed between them, a vow to return, to see her smile again. He tucked the photograph into an inside pocket, close to his heart. A reminder of what he was fighting for. He surveyed his preparations, a critical eye assessing every detail. He was ready, not eager, not bloodthirsty, but ready. He was a force of nature, an unstoppable tide, and he was about to crash upon the shores of Varga's fortified compound, into the jungle. The emerald canopy swallowed him whole. One moment Chuck stood at the edge of the jungle, the next he was a ghost, a whisper in the rustling leaves. He moved with a fluidity that belied his age, each step deliberate, each placement of his weight calculated to minimize sound. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of humidity that clung to his skin. The scent of decaying vegetation mingled with the sweet, cloying aroma of unknown blossoms, a paradoxical fragrance of life and death. He wasn't simply walking. He was reading the jungle, interpreting the subtle signs it offered. A broken twig, a disturbed patch of earth, the faint indentation of a boot heel in the mud. All spoke volumes. Varga's patrols were out in force, but they were clumsy, predictable, arrogant in their supposed dominion over this green hell. A chorus of buzzing insects rose in protest as he brushed past a towering fern. He ignored them, his focus laser-locked on his objective, the perimeter of Varga's compound. He had a rough map etched in his mind, gleaned from satellite images and whispered intel, enough to get him close. The rest would depend on his senses, his instincts. The ground sloped sharply downward, leading into a ravine choked with tangled vines and treacherous roots. Most would have circled around, choosing the easier path. Chuck descended without hesitation. This was a natural choke point, a place where the unwary would be vulnerable, a place where Varga's men would be least likely to expect an attack. Halfway down, he paused, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. A faint, metallic scent, almost imperceptible, drifted on the breeze. Gun oil fresh. He melted into the shadows, becoming one with the vegetation. Moments later, two of Varga's soldiers emerged from the undergrowth, their AK-47s slung carelessly over their shoulders. They were young, bored, their eyes scanning the jungle with a lack of genuine interest. They spoke in hushed tones, their words lost to Chuck in the rustling leaves, but their body language was unmistakable. They were more concerned with their next meal than with the possibility of an ambush. Chuck waited until they had passed. Their footsteps fading into the distance, he emerged from the shadows. His face grim. Varga's army was poorly trained, undisciplined, but they were numerous and they were armed. The ravine floor was a quagmire of mud and stagnant water. Leeches clung to exposed skin, their bites barely registering. He pushed onward, his movements tireless, relentless. He scaled the opposite slope, pulling himself up by thick vines, his muscles burning with exertion. At the crest of the ridge, he paused to survey the landscape. The jungle stretched before him, an endless ocean of green in the distance. He could hear the faint rumble of a vehicle engine closer, the sharp, piercing cry of a jungle bird, and something else, a low, guttural growl. He crouched low, his senses on high alert. He scanned the undergrowth, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. Then he saw it point, two glowing eyes, burning like embers in the gloom. A large jungle cat, its muscles coiled, its gaze fixed on him. It was a standoff, a silent battle of wills. The cat was hungry, desperate. Chuck was an intruder, a threat. He slowly reached for his knife, his eyes never leaving the animals. He knew he could kill it, but he didn't want to. The jungle was not his enemy. He was merely passing through. He lowered his gaze slightly, a gesture of submission. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, signaling his intention to retreat. The cat remained motionless, its eyes still locked on him. He took another step, and another. Slowly, imperceptibly, he moved away, giving the animal its space. Finally, with a low growl, the cat turned and disappeared into the undergrowth. Chuck exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced down countless enemies in his life, but there was something about the raw, untamed power of the jungle that filled him with a primal respect. He adjusted his pack and continued his trek, the setting sun casting long shadows through the trees. The jungle was testing him, pushing him to his limits. But he would not be deterred. He had a promise to keep. The tribe's plea. Hidden within a screen of colossal ferns, Chuck spied on the village. A huddle of thatched roofs clung to the steep hillside, carved from the jungle's embrace. The air tasted of wood smoke, laced with a bitter tang. Fear, unmistakable in its potency. Varga's shadow loomed large. Two soldiers, sporting the same drab-green uniforms Chuck knew too well, swaggered through the narrow paths, rifles slung with a casual menace. They confiscated the village's threadbare harvest, plantains, yams, every scrap of sustenance. The villagers watched with vacant eyes, resignation carved into their features. A soldier, impatient, struck an elderly woman, sending her sprawling with a brutal shove. Chuck's hands clenched into fists. He waited for the cruel laughter to fade, then moved, not directly into the village. Instead, he skirted the perimeter, cloaked by the dense foliage, reaching the edge of their cultivated patches. There, a boy, barely 10, attempted to rescue a few forgotten yams. The boy was all angles and dirt, ribs stark beneath a stained tunic. He flinched as Chuck neared, his eyes wide with alarm, yet he remained rooted to the spot. Chuck knelt, his gaze softening. "Those soldiers, they take everything, don't they?" he murmured. The boy's nod was a delicate tremor. Silently, Chuck located a small area of untouched soil with his bare hands. He quickly fashioned a small hollow and planted one yam, carefully patting the earth around it. He repeated the action with the remaining ones, guiding the boy and spacing them just so. "The earth remembers kindness," Chuck reassured, his voice a comforting murmur. "Treat it well and it will provide." The boy observed, apprehension giving way to budding curiosity. When Chuck had finished, he gestured towards a nearby stream. "Good water, but the soldiers, they foul it, sometimes." Chuck followed him. The problem was instantly apparent. The water was clouded with grime, tainted by the runoff from Varga's nearby encampment. He devoted the next hour to diverting the stream's flow, crafting a rudimentary series of filtration pools with rocks and charcoal. The boy worked alongside him, his earlier fear evaporating as twilight painted the sky. The water ran noticeably cleaner. More villagers had gathered at the edge of the clearing, observing Chuck with cautious appraisal. An older man, his face a tapestry of lines etched by experience and worry, stepped forward, tall and sinewy. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of command. This was Chief Kai. "You are not one of Varga's dogs," Kai stated, his voice a low rasp. "Why do you aid us?" Chuck met his somber gaze. "Varga is a blight on this land. I intend to eradicate it." Kai scrutinized him, a long, probing look. "Varga has power. His compound. It is a fortress. I need to understand this fortress," Chuck pressed. "Every detail, every chink in its armor." Kai hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Come, share our meager meal. Then we will share what we know." That night, illuminated by the quivering light of the fire, Chuck became privy to the tribe's ordeal. For generations, they had cultivated this valley, honoring its gifts. Then Varga had descended, seizing their sustenance, contaminating their springs, and sowing terror among them. "The compound rises on the bones of the old ruins," Kai explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "The walls are formidable, reinforced with stone. Watchtowers command each corner. Perpetually manned, the primary gate is heavily fortified, but there is another avenue, a forgotten tunnel, hewn by my ancestors for flight from warring tribes. It surfaces within the heart of the compound, near the abandoned well." He indicated a spot on the rough diagram. "But the passage is unstable, collapsed in places, hazardous." "Hazardous I can manage," Chuck countered, his voice steady. "What is the guard presence around the perimeter?" Kai sighed, the sound heavy. "Too many. Varga trusts no soul. He cycles them relentlessly. But the southern flank, bordering the jungle, is less closely watched. They deem it impassable. They are complacent, believing the jungle is guardian enough." "Complacency is a weapon," Chuck said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. He soaked in the intelligence, mentally charting the compound, the patrol routes, the secret tunnel. Infiltrating Varga's sanctuary would be the riskiest venture of his life. But Anya was depending on him, as was this tribe. As the fire's embers began to fade, Kai rested a hand on Chuck's shoulder. "Be wary, stranger. Varga is a viper. He strikes unseen." Chuck nodded. "I've tangled with vipers before, Chief, and I know where to strike to end them." Storming the fortress. The moon hung fat and low, casting long skeletal shadows across the jungle floor as Chuck moved. Kai's information was precise. The tunnel entrance, concealed behind a curtain of thick vines near the village outskirts, was exactly where the boy said it would be. He knelt, drawing his knife, and sliced through the tangled vegetation. The earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves filled his nostrils as he pulled the vines aside, revealing a narrow, dark passage. He paused, took a deep breath, and whispered a silent prayer for Anya's safety. Then, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The tunnel was cramped, forcing him to crawl for what felt like an eternity. The air grew thick and stale, heavy with the smell of mildew. Finally, the passage opened into a small, earthen chamber. A rickety ladder led upwards. Chuck tested each rung before committing his weight, the silence amplifying the creaks and groans of the aging. He emerged into the cool night air, finding himself inside a maintenance shed on the outer perimeter of Varga's compound. The shed reeked of motor oil and stale coffee. He listened intently. 2 guards patrolled the area just outside, their voices low and guttural as they traded complaints about their assignment. Chuck moved like a whisper. He slipped out of the shed, the shadows his ally. The first guard never saw him coming. A swift chop to the throat silenced him instantly. The second guard, startled by his comrade's sudden collapse, barely had time to register the figure emerging from the darkness before Chuck's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into unconsciousness. He dragged both bodies into the shed, out of sight. The compound walls loomed, a formidable barrier of reinforced concrete topped with razor wire. Sentries walked the ramparts, their silhouettes stark, against the night sky. Chuck knew he couldn't simply scale the wall. The guards were too alert and he needed a distraction, a way to create an opening. He remembered the fuel depot Kai had mentioned. Located near the western wall, that it was a risky move, but it was the best option he had. Moving with practiced stealth, he circled the perimeter, avoiding the spotlights that swept across the grounds. He reached the fuel depot, a cluster of large metal tanks surrounded by a chain-link fence that he pulled out a small, shaped charge from his pack. Carefully placing it against the base of one of the tanks, he set the timer for 5 minutes, then retreated to a safe distance. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. The explosion ripped through the night, a deafening roar that shook the ground. A fireball erupted, illuminating the compound in a hellish glow. Alarms blared, and the guards on the ramparts scrambled, shouting in panic. This was his chance. While the chaos reigned, Chuck sprinted towards the breach he hoped the explosion had created. The wall was damaged, but not completely destroyed. A gaping crack spiderwebbed across the concrete, wide enough for him to squeeze through. He didn't hesitate. He plunged through the opening, landing inside the compound with a roll. He was immediately met with a hail of gunfire at Varga's soldiers. Their initial panic replaced by a fierce determination, opened fire from behind sandbagged positions. Chuck moved like a phantom, dodging bullets and returning fire. With deadly accuracy, he weaved through the chaos. His movements a blur of controlled aggression. One by one, Varga's soldiers fell, their screams lost in the din of the firefight. He advanced relentlessly, pushing deeper into the compound, his focus unwavering. He could feel Anya's presence, a beacon in the heart of the darkness. He wouldn't stop until he reached her. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning fuel, a testament to the storm he had unleashed. The showdown. The stench of burnt propellant assaulted Chuck's nostrils as he navigated the ravaged compound. Despite the explosive's initial disarray, Varga's troops were swiftly regaining order. He flowed through the environment, a silent tempest of calculated force. A sentry, rifle raised, appeared. A moment later, the weapon lay on the ground, and the man slumped soundlessly against the wall. Chuck continued his advance, each neutralization a study in economy and deadliness. Their faces, youthful and grim, couldn't mask the primal fear in their eyes, the dread of encountering the unknown. An unstoppable entity, he was more than a man. He was a consequence, an inescapable reckoning. The map Kai had provided proved faultless. He threaded the labyrinthine corridors, a discordant chorus of gunfire echoing from all sides. A destructive symphony his presence conducted. He halted before a reinforced steel door, guarded by 2 brutes clad in black. They snarled a challenge, weapons trained on him. "Stop! You are forbidden to proceed." Chuck responded with action, not words. He launched a rapid-fire assault of fists and kicks. One guard gasped and clutched at his crushed larynx, while the other, reeling, collapsed, his nose a crimson ruin. The door remained sealed. That a cursory glance revealed an electronic lock. He bypassed it with practiced ease, his fingers flitting across the keypad with the dexterity of a concert pianist. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, huddled in the stark corner of a cell, Anya watched the opening. Door with wide, fearful eyes and a grime-streaked face. A fragile hope ignited in her expression. "Chuck?" she rasped, her voice barely audible. "We're leaving," he stated, his tone low and resolute as he moved to release her bonds. A simple metal clasp. Suddenly, a voice thundered from the threshold. Well, Chuck Norris himself. You've certainly exceeded expectations." Varga stood silhouetted in the doorway, flanked by 4 of his hand-picked guards, each carrying an automatic weapon. The Warlord was a mountain of a man, his features marred by old scars and predatory cunning gleaming in his eyes. Ignoring him, Chuck freed Anya. "Are you injured? Just frightened?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay behind me," he commanded, turning to confront Varga. "You believe you can simply waltz in and reclaim what belongs to me?" Varga scoffed. "You underestimate my dominion. You underestimate what I am capable of," Chuck countered, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. Varga gestured, and his guards unleashed a hail of bullets. Chuck yanked Anya down, using the thick cell wall as a shield. Projectiles chewed through the air, showering them in pulverized concrete and dust. He returned fire. Each shot a pinpoint strike of lethal accuracy. Two guards dropped, lifeless, while the remaining pair scrambled for cover. "Seize her," Varga bellowed. The remaining guards surged forward. Chuck met their assault head-on. A blur of devastating strikes. One crumpled, clutching a shattered kneecap. The other choked, airless, his windpipe crushed. Varga stared in enraged disbelief. "Enough games?" Varga growled. Advancing, he launched a powerful haymaker, aimed to shatter Chuck's skull. Chuck intercepted the blow effortlessly. The force jarring his arm, he retaliated with a focused kick to Varga's abdomen, sending the warlord stumbling backward, gasping for breath. The ensuing clash was a vicious dance of power and finesse. Varga possessed brute strength, but Chuck was quicker, more precise. Reading his opponent's intentions, he avoided a clumsy swing and responded with a series of debilitating blows to Varga's ribs. Varga roared, his face twisting into a mask of pain and unadulterated fury. Driven by desperation, he lunged. Chuck sidestepped, seized Varga's arm, and executed a rapid, bone-jarring throw. Varga slammed into the ground, deprived of air. Chuck stood over him, his face an unreadable mask. "It's finished, Varga." Varga spat, the globule landing near Chuck's boot. "I acknowledge no defeat." Chuck's gaze remained unwavering. He delivered a final, precisely targeted strike, rendering Varga unconscious. He turned to Anya, helping her to her feet. "We have to leave now." They bolted from the cell, a fresh barrage of gunfire erupting around them. They fought their way through the complex, Chuck carving a path with cold efficiency. Reaching the perimeter wall, they scaled it in seconds and dropped to the earth below. The jungle beckoned, a dark, verdant haven yet. The clamor of pursuit grew stronger behind them. Varga's forces were closing in. They sprinted, their lungs burning. Survival demanded escape. Chuck was certain this battle was far from over. Varga would pursue them relentlessly, but for the moment, they were uncaptured. That was paramount. That he glanced at Anya. Her face was drawn with weariness, but her eyes reflected a new resolve. That he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would deliver her to safety. He always did. Homeward bound. The jungle, no longer menacing but watchful, whispered secrets around them. A skittering leaf, a cracking branch, any could betray their flight. Chuck, a wraith of muscle and instinct, moved with liquid grace. Anya clinging to his back, her terror a leaden burden that Varga's pack wouldn't yield. Chuck had witnessed the feral gleam in their eyes, the desperate need to appease a ruined god. "Steady," Chuck rumbled, his breath ghosting across her skin. He shifted her weight, his awareness a fine-tuned instrument, reading the land, predicting threats. The approaching rain, sharp and coppery on the wind, carried the potential for salvation, blurring their trail, swallowing their sounds. They flowed through the undergrowth, specters clinging to the shade. Chuck navigated with meticulous precision, favoring choked pathways, using the Earth's architecture as a shield. Outrunning them was a fool's errand. This was a game of shadows, of turning predator to prey. He just needed the right stage. Hours dissolved into a blur of green and sweat. The sun, a molten coin behind the leafy roof, began its descent, smearing the sky with bruised oranges and violent violets. Anya, though bone-weary, remained staunch, her initial panic hardening into grim resolution. "Are they still close?" she rasped, her throat raw, persistent. Chuck conceded, offering no further comfort. Fueling her fear served no purpose. "We need water." He guided her toward the murmuring promise of a river, the sound amplifying with each stride to the bank. He scrutinized their options. The current surged, a muddy torrent carving its path. Ideal. "We cross here," he declared, indicating a scattering of boulders midstream. "Stay tight." The crossing was a treacherous dance. The river clawed at their legs, eager to drag them under. Anya stumbled, a strangled cry escaping her lips as frigid water engulfed her. Chuck anchored her, his grip an unyielding promise, his strength a haven in the chaos. They gained the opposite bank, shivering and sodden, temporarily safe. Chuck granted no respite that Varga's hounds wouldn't be far behind. He pressed onward, deeper into the tangled heart of the jungle, until he discovered his prize. A slender, coiling canyon, scarcely wide enough for a single person. "Here," he stated, his voice edged with purpose. "We end it here." He nestled Anya behind a jutting rock, obscuring her from view. Then, he waited, a silent sentinel that it wasn't long before their approach announced itself. The crunch of boots, the cracking of timber, the guttural howls of Varga's men. They flooded the canyon. Their gazes darting through the gloom, weapons poised, Chuck erupted into motion, a whirlwind of controlled fury in the dim light that he stripped them of their arms with brutal efficiency, turning their own steel against them. The canyon became a symphony of pain grunts, shrieks, the sickening thud of bodies impacting stone. Anya watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Chuck systematically erased Varga's hunting party. He was a force unleashed, inexorable and lethal. When the last attacker crumpled, silence descended, punctuated only by their ragged breathing. The journey from the jungle's embrace to the nearest village, though still fraught with danger, paled in comparison to their recent ordeal. Chuck ensured their security, his watchfulness unwavering. Finally, they reached the outskirts. The village lights a fragile constellation in the inky expanse that a beat-up jeep awaited them. Courtesy of contacts Chuck had cultivated in the past, he drove in silence, focused and unyielding. Anya remained quiet, submerged in reflection, the horrors of the past days playing on repeat in her mind's eye. They arrived at her family's estate just before dawn. The house pulsed with light, anxious figures flickering behind the windows as the jeep lurched to a halt. The gates swung open, and her parents spilled out, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and immense relief. Anya surged toward them, tears blurring her vision. She embraced them fiercely, burying her face in their shoulders, overwhelmed by the tide of emotion. Chuck lingered in the jeep, a silent guardian. He witnessed the reunion, the outpouring of affection, the palpable sense of deliverance that hung in the air. His task was complete when Anya turned to offer her thanks, to voice the gratitude that choked her. She found the jeep empty. Chuck had vanished, slipping back into the pre-dawn gloom as silently and mysteriously as he had materialized. Anya stood motionless for a long moment, gazing at the empty space, a profound ache settling in her chest. She knew she would carry his memory forever, the man who had risked everything to save her life. Later, as the sun crested the horizon, bathing the estate in its golden glow, Anya sat by the window sipping tea, striving to make sense of the whirlwind. She had faced death, stared into the abyss, and emerged transformed. The naive diplomat's daughter was gone, replaced by someone forged in fire. She had witnessed the darkness that lurked within the hearts of men, but she had also encountered the astounding courage and selflessness of one solitary figure. The reforestation project, once a mere cause, now resonated with a deeper purpose. It was a testament to hope, to resilience, to nature's capacity for renewal, and she, Anya Petrova, would dedicate herself to its protection, ensuring that their sacrifices were not in vain. She would be different, stronger, more resolute, more determined to leave her mark on the world. She would honor the man who had emerged from the shadows to rescue her, the man who had receded back into them, leaving behind only the whisper of his legend.